Okay, good morning. Today's daf is daf ayin, and the beginning of the daf continues this question, this doubt of whether we look at the core that grew before it was planted, or we look at the new growth. So we can start again at that point. Back on Samach Tessim Beis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines before the bottom, sort of like a third of the way up. Reb Shimon ben Pazi had the following question. Shibola shevia shlish kodem la'omer. If you have a stalk that already grew a third, it ripened to a full third before the omer was brought. Then va'akara, then it was uprooted. And then shasla, it was replanted la'achar ha'omer, after the omer was brought. V'hosifa, now it regrew, and now there is mostly the new growth. So mahu, what's the halacha of this stalk? Basar ikar azlinan, do we look at the core? The core had grown before the omer, so it's permitted by the omer, and therefore sharyeh omer, this thing was permitted by the omer. Odilmor maybe basar tosefes azlinan. The main thing is the addition later, and therefore now achiyavo omer abba. We need to wait till the next omer for it to be permitted. Says the Gemara, tifshatli, maybe we can resolve it from the following. Nehada amar Rabavo amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabavo says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, a halacha in regards to orla. Orla is the fruit of a young tree that's less than 3 years old. It's prohibited. You can't get any benefit. So what happens if we're not sure how to date this, whether it's a young tree or an old tree? Why? Because Yalda, you have a young tree, which is less than 3 years old. It has fruit. But then you cut that tree, and Sibcha Biskena, and now you graft it onto an old tree that's already 7 years old. Uva Peros, in the young tree, there was fruits. And now, afilu hosef b'masayim. Now the two things have grown together, so much so that the new growth is 200 times as much as the way it was when it started. The new growth is 200 times as much as what was put into this old tree. What, can you eat it? No, asr l'ochlam, you're not allowed to eat it. So what do you see? We don't look at the new growth. We look at the way it was when it started. When it started, it was a young tree with less than 3 years, with some fruits, orla. So now it's prohibited, even though now it's grown so much as part of the old tree, it stays prohibited. So let's say the same thing. Now lakula, in regards to a stalk, it was cut down before the omer. The omer therefore permits it. Now that it's replanted after the omer and so much of it regrows, so what? We look at the ikar, we look at the core. The Gemara says maybe that's not a proof. The Gemara suggests a second proof. Here's another proof. Shmuel Bar Nachmani says in Rabbi Yonasan, let's say you have an onion planted in a vineyard. So once it grows in the vineyard, it becomes kilaya kerem. It becomes prohibited. Oh, thank you. It becomes a mixture of a vegetable in a vineyard, which is now prohibited. And then the nekara kerem. Now the vineyard was uprooted. So the core, is a mixture of onion with vines. The core is prohibited. But now the vineyard's uprooted. And now it grows more. Even if it grows 200 times more than what it was when it started, it's still usher, it stays prohibited. So here too you see that we look at the core, we don't look at the regrowth. If the core, the beginning, is no good, even if now the growing later should make it good, it stays no good. So Gemara says, no, these are not proofs. Higufa coming by, because even though we accept these laws, we still have a question. Because what's the concept here? Is it that nifshet pshita leila rabbanan debasar ikar azlinan? Is it in these two cases that Amar of Shmuel Bar Nachmani and the case of Reb Shimon and the case of Rabavo and Rabbi Yochanan? Is it that in both of these cases, namely the onion in the vineyard and the orla that's grafted, that the rabbis are really sure the basar ikar azlinan, that the main thing is the core, and therefore the core is what sets the tone. Loshna l'kula v'loshna l'chumra. They would say that the core set the tone, both as a leniency or as a stringency. So then you could apply it here too, because even here, though it's to be a leniency, we're basically following the core. But there's another way to understand it. Dilma sfuki misafkalahu. Maybe there is a doubt. We are unsure whether we should follow the core or whether we should follow the new growth. And they are saying that in these questions of prohibitions, of kilaya karem and orla, be machmir, be strict, because you're not sure. One second. So if it's based on a suffix, maybe it's based on a suffix, and they're just saying to be strict because of the chumrah when you have a suffix. So now, if they're only saying based on a chumrah that it is kilaya karem or it is orla, so now in regards to chadash, in regards to the omer permitting it, but they're not sure. So again, based on a suffix, you should be machmir. So you shouldn't permit, you should say it's strict. So therefore, Dilma, maybe their psak in these other cases of orla and kilaya karem is sfukim misafkalu, is that they are in doubt. And therefore, if it's based on a doubt and they're just being strict, then l'chumra aminan l'kula lo aminan. You could only say it l'chumra to follow the core, but not that based on following the core, you can be mekel. So we don't know, teku, and we're going to leave it as a question. And now today's daf is going to go on with further applications of this question. We've seen this question of basar ikar azlinan, or basar, tzemach sheni azlinan. Do we follow the core? Do we follow the second growth in regards to three issues, in regards to orla, kilaya karem, and chadash? Now we're going to see it in regards to other issues of halacha. Yeah, question, Almog?
I was asking about Omer and Chadash and everything. So the answer should also be there's Svekal Omer, just like this. Why is that? I mean, I don't get the whole. If you're going to go, okay,
no, but then if it's Svekal Chumra, you're saying you're not following Ikar. You're not following the core that was cut down.
No, I'm talking about the. He was asking about Shibolet.
He cut the shibolet down before the omer, but he replants it after the omer, and now it grew. So the chumrah would be to say you can't eat it until the next omer, which means not batar ikar azlinan, but batar tzemach azlinan. So that's our question. Is there a rule that we're always basar ikar, or is there a rule that we're always l'chumrah? If the rule is always l'chumra, sometimes it'll be basar ikar, the two cases of kilaya karem and orla, because that's the chumra there. And then omer would be a different chumra, but that's not resolving our question.
Generally, in halacha, when there's an uncertainty, we are lenient.
So no, on biblical matters, we are strict.
On rabbinical, we're lenient. Okay.
All right, so now other issues with the same question. When you have a plant that grew enough to be viable, was cut down, and then replanted and grew tons more. Is it that the first part is gone? We just look at how it was regrown? Or do we say, no, the first part established it, even though it grew a ton more, it's just following the way it was in the first part? That's the question. So now, Bayi Rabba. Rabba asks a question. We asked it about Omer, we asked it about Klayat Kerem, we asked it about Orla. Now what about Linyan Meiser? What about in regards to the law of Meiser, of separating 10% and giving it to the Levi? What was the question? The question was like this. Could go on like this. Plants grew a third. Dam dinu, they were then harvested. Vasrinu. And 10% was taken off of these stalks that had grown a third and given to the Levi. Then they didn't make the pile. Then vishatlinu. Then they went and they replanted these stalks. Vosifalahu. And they grew a ton more. And now they cut it again. So now what's the halacha? Imtim tzalomar, if you're going to say lo azlinan basar ikar, that we don't necessarily follow the fact that it was cut down before. When it's replanted and regrows, now it can have a new identity. And therefore, Tosefes Bo Yasuri, the fact that it regrew, that new growth needs to have a meiser taken from it. So Iker Mai. Now what about the stalks that were planted? Do they need a second meiser from them or not? That's the question. Amarle Abaye said, of course they would need a second meiser. Maishna mikol chiti v'sari d'alma. How's this any different than any wheat or barley? Any wheat or barley are planted in the ground, things grow from them. And now what grows, you have to separate meiser from everything, not just from the stalks, but also meiser of the roots, if the roots are still around, even though the roots that were first planted had meiser separated from them, so what? Now they become a plant. So of course, Amalei, so Rava said back to Abai, no, there's a difference. Of course, if you plant something and the seed disintegrates into a root, so now you have to separate meiser from the whole plant, including from the root. My question is about stalks that are davar she'ein zaro kala, where the stalks that are replanted, they did not disintegrate into roots. They are still stalks. So if they are still stalks and they had meiser taken from them, so okay, the new growth, fine, you'll separate meiser from. But what about the roots? You already separated meiser from these roots. Maybe you don't need to separate another meiser from these roots now that there's something growing from them. So what's the halacha? So Gemara says, maybe we can prove the answer to this question too. Tifshutle, he could resolve it. Mehad Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Rabbi Yochanan. From this, the Rabbi Yitzchak said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Litra batza. If a person has an entire liter of onions, shetikno, that Trumos and Maisos were taken out of this liter. So now it's not Tevel anymore, it's kosher. And then Zaro, then he plants this liter of onions in a field, and now new plants grow out of the liter of onions. What's the halacha? Misaser lefi kulo. Let's say the new growth is 2 liters, plus there was a liter put in. He has to take out of 3 liters meiser, 10%. So what do you see? That even though the onions have not disintegrated, they didn't become roots.
1/3.
And these onions that were planted, before they were planted, they had meiser taken from them. But now that there's a new growth, so now we need meiser for the new growth. We also need meiser for these roots as well, for these foundations again. So Gemara says, no, there's a difference. Hasam in regards to onions. Hainuzvi also. That's the norm, that when it's planted, the onion is planted, not a seed, and the onion doesn't disintegrate. But Hacha, in regards to stalks of wheat, Lav Hainuzvi also. It's not normal to replant a stalk that grew 1/3 and was cut. The norm is that you take seeds of wheat and you plant them and they disintegrate. But here you're replanting a stalk. So here, where it's not normal, maybe now the fact that it regrew doesn't make the original identity lost. The original identity is still there. Maybe you only need to take meiser from the new growth, but not from the stalks that have been replanted. All right, another similar question.
Didn't we go, when we went to Israel, we went to that place where they took the seeds and they germinated it in perfect conditions, and they had acres planted on tables, smaller plants. So if they took the 10% from those and replanted them, they would have taken it again.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to the Gemara is going to talk about the issue of flower pots. We did talk about that during Shemitah. Atzitz Nakuv and Atzitz She'eno Nakuv. If you have a flower pot that doesn't have a hole, so then it's not considered in the ground anymore. It's considered in a flower pot. So that they'll have special halachos. In regards to Shemitah, what we saw was that they were able to plant vegetables in it. And we'll see in regards to Meiser. That's on this daf. Yes.
Rabbi, what is the Meiser comes from the production. What is that to do with the roots?
What do you mean by the production?
I mean, just whatever is, the plant is produced, 10% goes to here for Meiser.
No,
but you're talking about the roots too? The roots
right,
is involved.
These roots had their Meiser already separated, but now that they've grown new stuff, do we say that now they're part of the new stuff? Or we say they still exist the way they were?
Oh.
They're already fine. You just have to take out of the new stuff.
taxation.
That's the question. Is it double taxation or is it a new
Double taxation.
thing now?
New York State or Texas?
Another question. Amar le Rav Chanina bar Manyumi la Abaye. Rav Chanina, the son of Manyumi, said to Abaye, Atzit sheino nakov mahu. What's the law with the flower pot that doesn't have a hole? So in other words, let's say this is Roger's case. There's a table, so there are no holes in the table, and on top of the table there are flower pots. So now the flower pots are not considered to have holes, because on their bottom there's a bottom that doesn't have a hole. And you've planted in these flower pots, 50 cabbage plants. And you have next to the table in the ground a row of 50 cabbage plants. Can you take maaser from the cabbage plants that are in the flower pots on behalf of the cabbage plants that are in the ground? Because maybe that's right. As Izzy points out, the flower pot that doesn't have a hole is considered not really in the ground. So there the obligation is only midrabanan, whereas the cabbage in the ground is doraisa. So could you separate meiser from that which is obligated midrabanan on behalf of that which is obligated midoraisa? That was the question of Chanina bar Menyumi asked Abaye.
Did that flower pot get tameh? Because it's not considered on the in the ground.
Oh, also true, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
So now Abaye says to Rav Chanina bar Menyumi, I don't understand the question. Im lo nakov halo nakov. If the flower pot doesn't have a hole, so then of course it doesn't have a hole. It's not obligated. So you couldn't use it for things that are in the ground. You could use it for things that are not in the ground. So the Gemara explains. Maybe the question is like this. You planted in a flower pot that didn't have a hole, and the thing grew a bit. Then you made a hole in the flower pot, and it keeps growing. So now it's a similar question. Do we say that the new growth is obligated in Ma'aser Mida Oraisa, and therefore even the old growth gets pulled after it, and it would be obligated Mida Oraisa, and then you could separate Ma'aser from this flower pot, because the new is biblically obligated and the old is also biblically obligated now. Or maybe the root, the core, doesn't follow the new growth. So the new growth is obligated midoraisa, but the core of this plant, which grew when it was still with no hole, is only obligated midorabanan. And therefore the new growth is obligated midoraisa. You can't separate from that which is obligated midoraisa and that which is only obligated midorabanan. Maybe that's the question. So Abaye said, no, that's not a question. That's certainly obligated midoraisa, the original core. And you could separate Meiser from the new growth even on behalf of the initial core. It's not like the question of Rava about a stalk that's replanted. Because if you have a flower pot where things began to grow when it didn't have a hole, and then it got a hole and things continued to grow. So it's one long plant growth. It's all one long plant. And it's all connected. Therefore, va'ola, without a question, the root, the first part that grew when it was without a hole, is certainly the same as the plant that grew once there is a hole, and therefore the whole thing is considered now obligated. But in the question of a stalk, it was two plantings. It grew a third, then it was cut, then it was replanting. That's a different question, whether a replanting will take away the original core or not. All right, so now a similar question. Rabbi Vo had a question. Shibolas, let's say you have a stalk that was cut down, and more than cut down, now it was put into the pile, and mircha bekri, and the pile was smoothed out. So now it was obligated in Shumos and Maestros. And then v'shasla, then it was replanted, and things grew. And then kara Hashem, he called it truma or meiser b'mechuber when it was still attached to the ground. So mahu, what's the halacha in this case? Is it that kevan demer chatav lala, since it was in a pile that was smoothed out, it became tevel, it became obligated in trumas and meisos, and tevel, it has the name tevel, with trumas and meisos not separated from it. Therefore, now that it's replanted, kikar aleh Hashem kachala, even though it's replanted and it's in the ground, if he calls this plant that's growing again truma, it becomes holy. Or maybe kevan deshasla, once he plants it, pakale tivla mina, that removes the status of tevel. So calling a plant that's growing truma means nothing. So that was the question of Rabbi Vo. Amri l'Rabbanan la'Abaye, the rabbi said to Abaye, I understand. You can have things attached to the ground and they are truma. It's not, but don't we have a Mishnah that says, Lo matzinu truma b'mechuber l'karka. If something's attached to the ground, it could never be truma. So here you have a case where it could be truma. If that which is attached to the ground is a growth from something which already was tevel. Amalei, Sabaya said back to the Bnei Yeshiva, Kitanyahi, when that Brisa said that there's no truma in that which is attached to the ground, maybe is le'inyan misa v'chomesh, in regards to the fact that someone who's a non-Kohen, who eats truma on purpose, he deserves death from heaven. Or someone who's a non-Kohen eats truma by mistake, he has to pay a fifth, pay back the principal plus another fifth. That maybe doesn't apply to truma attached to the ground. Ditalish v'achil, only if he detaches it from the ground. Talushu, that's a normal act of eating. However, yigachin v'achil, if it's attached to the ground and he bends over and eats it when it's still attached to the ground, batla daito etzel kol adam. That's not a normal act of eating. Most people don't eat like that, bend over and eating off of what's still attached to the ground. People detach, bring it to them, and then eat it. They don't bow down to the food and eat it where the food is. So that's what it's saying. If it's not a normal act of eating, he wouldn't get misa for eating it. If he was a zar and b'shogeg, he wouldn't have to pay the principal and another fifth. But maybe it is truma. Maybe it is truma when it was attached to the ground. And if it is truma, once he detaches it and eats it, there would be all the laws. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Umayshna. What's going on here? Why is this different when he bends down to eat versus eating something that he detaches from the ground? Why is this different from that which is written in the notebook of Ilfa? What happens when a bird dies? So Beitze Nivla Sa'ofatar. Let's say a kosher chicken dies, and now it's in a vela. And when you open up this dead carcass, you find inside eggs. Miktsasan bachutz. Some of the egg is outside of the bird. Umiktsasan bifnim. And some of it is inside the bird. So some of the egg is inside the intestine, some of it is outside of the intestine. So the law is, mi bifnim, the part of the egg that was inside. Right, if the man puts his face into the intestines of the bird and he eats this egg that's still inside the intestines of the bird, so then he ate nevela. That would make him tameh for eating nevela, eating food that's tameh, and all of his clothing becomes tameh when he swallows this nevela. But if he takes the egg out and he eats it outside of this carcass, so now already it's not considered nevelas of tahor, the flesh of a nevela. It's eating eggs. So then then it wouldn't make his garments tameh. So what do you see? That even though it's not normal for a guy to bend over, put his head into a chicken carcass and eat the egg that's inside the intestine of the chicken carcass, it is considered an act of eating. So if you're going to say that truma attached to that when you have a plant attached to the ground, it could become truma. So even bending over and eating it should be an act of eating. So the Gemara answers no. Talosh avidi inchi da'achliha. When you have things that are normally detached, like eggs, so sometimes a person eats them out of the intestines, and it is normal for a guy to bend over and eat it inside the intestines of the animal. Mechuber, but it's attached to the ground. People don't bend over and eat it while it's still attached to the ground. That's just not normal. It's something attached to the ground. They lift it off of the ground. So a guy who does that, it's not an act of achila, and therefore he wouldn't have the laws of eating truma because it's an abnormal way of putting stuff into the system.
But why would the act of eating be defined by the form of eating as opposed to the ingestion of food? Why would Imam base it?
That's the chiddush, that eating is not just food going in, it's food going in a normal way. Let's say a person on Yom Kippur hooks himself up to an IV. So liquid goes in through veins. It's not a violation of Yom Kippur. It's not eating.
So someone who has a feeding tube, that will not be deemed eating based
That's
on
not
this,
eating,
on this
correct. It's not eating. Amar Rav Tivumi Bar Kisna, Amar Shmuel. Rav Tivumi Bar Kisna said in the name of Shmuel, Hazorea Kilayim, someone who plants together two prohibited mixtures. Let's say he plants grapes with wheat. Be'atzit sheino nakuv, in a flower pot that doesn't have a hole. Nevertheless, it's usher, even though it's not in the ground. Midrabanan, it's not allowed. Amar Abaye, Abaye said, Bishmo yashminan lo kamakas mardas midrabanan. Shop, I would understand if you would say that if you planted grapes with wheat in a flower pot with no hole, you get rabbinic beaten up. That would make sense. Ela asur, but to say you're not allowed to, my kamashmalan, what's the chiddush? Midrabanan hav yisriya. The midrabanan, this is considered a planting. Tanina, we learned that in Demai. Taram, if you separate truma, min she'eno nakov, al nakov, from that which grew in a pot that doesn't have a hole, on behalf of that which grew in a pot that does have a hole. Truma, it is truma midrabanan, but it wasn't truma midoraisa. So you have to redo it again from the pot that has a hole on behalf of a pot that has a hole. So we already see that midrabanan, it's considered truma. So of course, if you plant in a flower pot that does not have a hole, it would be aser midrabanan. So what are you adding? You already know this.
By the way,
Okay.
the whole, if I remember correctly, this is Torem and Chubar la Talush. But the other way around, I know that in Israel some people do that. There's certain ways to do it. You not Talush on Chubar. If you have a tree in your backyard and you're afraid that people are going to eat without truma,
Right.
so what you do is you estimate, you put it away, and you say this is truma on whatever is in the tree. You put it in the fridge. There's a way. There's a certain, I don't know,
Right.
but there's certain ways of doing it.
Right.
And that's how. The other way around, you can do it.
Right.
Because otherwise, people eat without truma. In Israel, it's actually.
That's true, but the truth is, a snack is not obligated in truma yet. In other words,
No,
you have to have miruach. You have to smear out the pile to create tevel. So if somebody's in a field and he picks off an apple off of a tree, that apple's not yet chayiv in truma. It was odlon ra'ak nehabayit. It didn't have miruach yet.
But that's like the Yedah.
Nice. Yeah, Nakiya Dash of Yerushalayim. All right, now we go back to the laws of challah. Challah is not just the name of a loaf. Challah is the part of dough taken out of 5 pounds of dough that is supposed to be given to the Kohen. Since nowadays everybody's impure, so challah, which has a status like truma, you can't give it to a Kohen. It's like truma tmeya. So that's why the piece of dough that we take away nowadays, we put into an oven and we burn it. Okay, what's obligated in challah? Dough, which is an asira sa'ifa, namely dough of 43 and a little bit of eggs. And nowadays it would be 5 pounds. So it has to be that it came from the 5 grains: wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. Says the Mishnah, chitin, wheat, vasaorin, and barley, vakusmin, and the spelt, vashibola shual, and oats, vashifon, and the rye. Harei elu chayavin b'chala. These 5 grains, if a dough is made out of them, there's an obligation of challah. Umitzdarfen zeh im zeh, and we'll see sometimes some of them can combine with each other. You can't combine half of 5 pounds of wheat with half of 5 pounds of barley, but you could combine wheat with spelt. So half of 5 pounds of wheat with half of 5 pounds of spelt is considered combined to be a full 5 pounds that you're obligated to separate challah. These 5 grains asurim b'chadash l'lifnei Pesach. You can't eat them if they were planted and grew before Pesach, because they need the omer to permit the chadash, to permit the new produce. In addition, umiliktzor, you're not allowed to harvest them in lifnei omer before the omer is brought. Imishrishu, in these 5 grains, if they took root before the omer, then omer matiran, the omer makes them permitted, even though they get harvested maybe in Tammuz, they get harvested in Elul, but they took root before Pesach. Im lav, if they didn't take root before Pesach, they only take root, let's say, in Iyar or in Sivan, and asur nachiyava omer abba, and they're prohibited until the next omer. Says the Gemara Brisa, Tosefta, that explains this Mishnah. Tana went in the Brisa, Kusmin, spelt, min chitin. That's a type of wheat, so it can combine with wheat. Shibola shual, oats, and shifon, and rye, min son, are a type of barley. They combine with barley. Kusmin, what is kusmin? In Aramaic, it was called gulva. What is shifon? In Aramaic, it's called dishra. Shibola shual is called shibole tala. So Gemara says, what's the point of our Mishnah? Very important law. These are the 5 grains, but rice and millet are not grains. Hani in, so these things are obligated in challah. These are the things that have a law of chadash. But orez v'dochan, but rice and millet, lo, are not obligated in challah. How do we know that rice and millet don't have an obligation if you make a dough of rice flour that you don't have to separate challah from it? So Rish Lakish explained, because we learned from matzah. Asid is a gzeira shava of lechem, and the word lechem in regards to matzah. Ksevach, it says here, it'll be when you eat from the bread of the land. Uksevasim, it says that matzah is lechem oni. So just like matzah has to be from the 5 grains, the law of chadash is only from the 5 grains. Hasam gufa minan, how do we know that matzah is only from the 5 grains? Rish Lakish answered, that was also taught in the Brisa from the Yeshiva of Rabbi Shmuel. Ben Yaakov was also taught in the Brisa in the Yeshiva of Rabbi Ben Yaakov. The pasuk says, "Lo sochal olav chametz shivas yam tochal olav matzos lechem oni." Don't eat about it chametz for 7 days. You know matzos, which is poor man's bread. So the pasuk links chametz to matzah, and that's to teach you the following: things that could become chametz. Those are the things that a person could fulfill his obligation as matzah on Pesach. Yatsu elu, it excludes rice and millet. Shein boim lidei chimutz, they do not have the ability to ferment and become chametz, and therefore they cannot also serve as matzah. If you leave the rice and millet with water, there is some type of inflation of the dough. That's not chimutz, that is sirchon. That's not called fermenting, that's called spoiling. It's a different type of inflation, and therefore it's not chametz. If it's not chametz, it can't serve as matzah when it didn't become chametz. Umitztar from zemzeh, some of these things combine with each other. Tani we learned in a brisa. Tvua, if you have kernels of wheat, v'akmachim, and flour from the wheat, v'abetsekos, as well as dough, mitztar from zemzeh, combines with each other. In regards to what is it saying that they combine? Rav Kahana said in chadash. In regards to chadash, that if somebody takes a little kernel of wheat before the omer, and some flour of wheat that was planted and grew before the Omer, and some dough made out of the flour that was planted and grew before the Omer, and before the Omer he mixes these combinations, these three items together so that they are a kazayas, and he eats it before the Omer, he would get malchus, he'd get lashes. So it's saying it combines to give lashes for the prohibition of eating chadash. Rabbi Yosef, when it says that it combines, is le'inyin Pesach, in regards to Pesach, that if you put together a kazayas of kernels of wheat, mixing with water and a little dough and a little flour, and he eats it, he'd be chayav for the laws of kazayas on Pesach, kazayas of chametz on Pesach. Rav Papa said, what does it mean it combines? Le'inyin ma'aser sheni, that if he combined kernels of wheat with flour, with dough of ma'aser sheni, and to be kazayas, when he eats this kazayas of this mixture of three items outside of the wall of Yushalayim of ma'aser sheni, lucky you would get malchus because it combines. And Rava says the combination is le'inyin tumas ochlin, in regards to the impurity of food, which, as we've just mentioned before, in regards to the dead animal, if you eat a egg worth of impure food, it creates impurity on the person once he swallows the food. And these things combine. Here's the chiddush: that the law of the grain kernels as well as the flour, dumya de b'tzeikos, is like the dough. Mahasam, just like in regards to the dough, ochla be'ena, you'd have to eat just the dough without unedible stuff mixed into it. Because people normally sift flour before they make it into dough. So too, avhachanami, here too, when you have grain kernels and flour, it had to be uchla be'ena. It would have to be grain kernels, but not grain kernels together with chaff. It would have to be flour, but not flour together with, clumps, with sediments. Because those are not considered food. For Atanya, as we learned in a brisa, chita, when you have a wheat kernel, bein klufa, whether it is peeled, or bein sheina klufa, whether it's not peeled, mitzdarefes, it can combine with other foods, with dough. But but when you have a barley kernel, klufa, if it's peeled, mitzdarefes, it can combine with dough to be tomas ochlin. But kisheina klufa, if it's not peeled, eina mitzdarefes, it doesn't combine. Asks the Gemara, Eini, is that so? Well, Tana deber Yishmael, but we know that there were students in the yeshiva of Yishmael who taught a brisa in regards to Tumas Ochlim. The verse says, "V'chiyipol minivlasam al kol zera zarua asher yizareya," and if it'll fall from the dead nevela on any seed that will be planted. So kederach shebnei adam otziim lizriya. So that means foods that people take out to plant. Chita bikli pasa, wheat in its peel. Saora bikli pasa, barley in its peel. Adashim bikli pasan, lentils in their peel. So you see that the peels do combine with the food. And it's the Gemara lo kash, it's not a contradiction. Other brisa of Rabbi Yishmael is balachos, peels that are still moist. So since they're still moist, they are edible and they are considered food. The first brisa is biaveshos, peels that are dry. Once peels are dry, the peels are not food. So then we're saying it's compared to dough, just like the dough is fully edible. The kernels have to be fully edible. The peels can't combine to the kernels. Then the Mishnah said these 5 grains are surim b'chadash melifnei Pesach. They have the prohibition of chadash before Pesach. How do we know this? Rish Lakish said again. The Gzeir Shav we saw before. Asya lechem matzah. We have a Gzeir Shav. It says lechem here. It says lechem in regards to matzah, and that is the source. The liktzar lifnei omer. You're not allowed to cut these things down before the omer. We know this. Rabbi Yochanan explained Asya. We know it also from Gzeir Shava. Reishis from challah. It says in regards to cutting before the omer, reishis k'tzirchem. This is the first of what you're cutting. It says in regards to challah, reishis ariso seichem. It says in both reishis. So just like challah is from the 5 grains, so too the 5 grains can't be cut down before the omer. So Gemara says, "My kodem l'omer." What does it mean that you can't cut the 5 grains before the omer? Rabbi Yonah omer means kodem k'tiras omer. You can't cut the other grains before you cut the barley for the omer. It's the night of this, right after the first day of Pesach. That night you cut the new grain for the omer. But after that, come the morning, you can now cut every grain, even though the omer hasn't been brought yet. However, Rabbi Yossi ben Zavda omer kodem avas omer. You have to wait for the omer to be brought for the grain to be cut. Okay, Bezrat Hashem will continue here tomorrow.